So what can we learn when we look at these searches? So if you remember in the 2008 presidential election, all the way back then, Barack Obama was elected president. He defeated John McCain. And there was a big question after this election: did race matter in the voting? Did people care that Obama was black when deciding whether to vote for him? And this is kind of a classic question that could be complicated by social desirability bias. If you ask Americans, the overwhelming majority of Americans, 98 or 99% of Americans, say they don't care. They didn't care that Obama was black in the election. And that was kind of why a lot of people concluded that we lived in a post-racial society back in the day. There was this idea that that voters voted for Obama, and they said that they didn't care that Obama was black. So could you use Google searches to potentially, because people are so honest, because people tell Google things that they might not tell anybody else on socially unacceptable attitudes, could you use Google searches to get the real answer of the effect that race may have played in people's voting decision? So what I did is I made a map of racist search volume on Google. And this is the percent of Google searches that include a very, very charged racist word. I won't say it out loud, but you can kind of guess maybe what it is. And the first thing that struck me about this data first was how common the search was. So in the time period I was using, people are making these searches, these racist searches, in about the same frequency as they were searching Lakers and migraine and Daily Show and Economist. So it wasn't by any stretch of the imagination a fringe search. These are mostly for jokes, mocking African Americans. That's kind of the big theme of these searches. The other thing that struck me about this map is it looked very, very different from the map I would have expected of racism. So if you had asked me where racism was highest against African Americans in the United States, I would have guessed that racism is predominantly concentrated in the South. If you think of the country's history, the Civil War, slavery, we think of racism as having a strong North-South divide. And definitely racism is highest. Some of the places it is highest are in the Deep South, places like southern Mississippi and southern Louisiana. But you can also see in the map with darker red, meaning a higher frequency of these searches, that it's also higher in many places in the north, in western Pennsylvania, in eastern Ohio, industrial Michigan, upstate New York, rural Illinois. I think the real divide this search data reveals is not north versus south, it's east versus west. You see that it's much, much higher east of the Mississippi River and then kind of drops pretty substantially west of the Mississippi River. So once I had this map, I wanted to see how you could, because people are so honest here, could you use this data to measure how much Obama really lost in the 2008 election? And of course, you can't just compare racist searches to votes for Obama, because it might be that places that have high racist searches would have opposed any Democratic candidate in 2008, so that wouldn't be really a fair comparison. So what I did is I compared Obama's vote total to previous Democratic candidates, such as John Kerry in the previous election, who was a white candidate and was ranked similarly liberal. And what you see when you do that, and you can read the paper, read it in the book, is a very, very strong, significant relationship that places that had highest racist search volume, these places in Appalachia or places in industrial Michigan, support Obama much less than previous Democratic candidates. And you can start controlling for anything you'd like. You start controlling for education or demographics or political views or cultural views, and nothing changes the relationship that was a big factor. And overall, I conclude that Obama lost about 4 percentage points from racism, which was much higher than you'd get from really any other measure. And he got about 1 to 2 percentage points from increased African American turnout. So this paper kind of languished in the academic world for a little bit, and then very recently, when the Trump phenomenon was starting, that Trump was saying a lot of racially charged, making a lot of racially charged comments, and people were questioning how is he doing so well, even when he's saying these things that you're not supposed to say, and was racism driving some of his support? And Nate Cohn of the New York Times asked me for the data on the racist search volume. He had data on support for Trump in the Republican primary. And he said of all the variables he could test, whether it was age or education or economics or trade exposure, the single highest correlation he could find was the racist search volume for Trump. So this, of course, does not mean that everybody who supports Trump is racist, but it does mean that some of his supporters were, and that it did drive some of his progress in the primary.